Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our communities. What did they do to get started and what are they doing to stay there? And today I am talking to another special guest. His name is Ira Wolfe. He is the president and chief Googlization officer at Poised for the Future company. He's also a speaker at this year's 2022 HRSouthwest Conference. And Ira, hey, I'm glad to have you on the show. How you doing?
I'm excellent, Bruce, and it's exciting. I'm really looking forward to being back in Dallas and Fort Worth at the conference. Missed it the last 2 years.
Oh my goodness! So we are just a few weeks away from the HRSouthwest Conference, and we're going to be talking over the next few weeks with conference speakers and talking about all things HR Southwest. You know, I've been part of HR Southwest. I actually attended my first conference in 2005. And a funny story, our company was not going to purchase a booth. So I was on the supplier side. And I was trying to think, you know, I've just heard so many great things about this conference. And I had a partner that said, hey, we're going to be exhibiting. How about you just step in our booth and we'll just team up. And I have not looked back since. That was just a great experience. When was your first HR Southwest conference, Ira?
Yeah, it's really just about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It came out with my book, Recruiting in Age of Googlization, and that obviously recruiting was a hot topic, and finding people still is a hot topic. But I was invited to speak out there, had a great time. I always bring my wife along to these events. And we really, really enjoyed it. We actually stayed nearby. It was very memorable. We stayed at the Hilton, which is the old Hotel Fort Worth. You know, so we had a really interesting tour of the facility. The concierge took us around and showed us the back route that President Kennedy had taken on unfortunately a very unfortunate day. That day. So it was just interesting, and it sort of became a space and said, we want to come back, and I was invited back and back and back. And so here I am again. So, and fortunately, actually very honored this year. I was selected as the Hall of Fame speaker for Southwest.
Hall of Fame speaker. That is exciting. That is energizing. We're going to talk about the HR Southwest Conference. And by the way, congratulations. I'm excited. I'm energized to watch you be inducted this year. Hey, I would love to, you know, for the listeners, I would love for you to share the Ira Wolfe story. Let us get to know you a little bit more before you come to Fort Worth and share your wisdom. Where did you grow up, and how in the world did you get into leadership and then become an author and become this chief Googlization officer?
Well, it's a very unconventional and maybe for some a surprising route. I certainly didn't envision myself as a kid, you know, owning a leadership consulting company, writing books in this regard. In fact, in fifth grade, I remember standing up. A teacher went around the room. As a W, I was at the end of in the back of the room. I was almost next to last, I think. And they went around, and the teacher said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And for some reason, I said, "I'm going to be a dentist," and I stuck with that. So I actually went through college and dental school and residency and practiced dentistry for 17 years, almost 18 years. I loved everything about dentistry but dentistry. I found that I loved running the business. I loved, not that I liked hiring people, but I liked building the teams. I liked helping people. I loved the marketing. I loved being part of the community, all those things that indirectly were part of leadership. Really. And so 27 years ago, I actually said I had reached a milestone in my life and sold the business, never looked back, started this company, and, you know, focused on helping companies hire the right people. And indirectly, it was all about leadership anyway. It was about how to be a better person, how to leave the world a better place after me. And as an older baby boomer, I got a lot of years under me, and still working hard at trying to change the world.
I love that. You know, I read somewhere that said you are a millennial trapped in a baby boomer's body. I just caught my attention. Tell me about that.
Well, I wrote a book a number of years ago. In fact, now it's my web or my podcast name, Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. When I wrote my first book, which was The Perfect Labor Storm, by the way, it was 22 years ago, I started to talk about it, and we are in a perfect labor storm right now. But there were so many people at that time talking about, what do you think about these darn millennials? I mean, they just have this the work ethic, and they're so different. And nobody wanted to talk about the trends, the economic and the demographic trends that were going on. Everybody wanted to talk about the generations in the workplace. So I said, I'm going to write a book about it. And it started at Geeks, Geezers, and Technology, and then The Wired, The Tired, and Technology. And one shower moment, I had this, why do I call it alliterations? I'm always fascinated by it. Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. And so I started to, write about that. And I did a lot of speaking, obviously, around that topic. And I walked into a conference one time, and somebody looked at me and they said, I introduced myself, and they go, "Oh, we thought you'd be so much younger. Your voice is so much younger. Your enthusiasm so much younger." And they said, we expected a millennial to be doing this, not a baby boomer. And so it stuck. So I became the millennial trapped in a baby boomer body, and it's been great for marketing, but it's held up. And even to this point, my peers, I'm an older baby boomer. Nearly all my peers are retired or retiring. And, I'm still very active in business because I really enjoy doing it, and just launched a new product, a new coaching leadership product, which maybe we can talk about. And also, writing another book. And so I'm still playing a young man's game, young person's game, not a young man. Let's be correct here, a young person's game.
I love that. And you sound young, and your energy, just coming through the screen. I mean, it's awesome. Hey, let's talk about the HR Southwest Conference. I mean, here we are now. And by the way, again, Hall of Fame speaker. Whenever you were told you were going to become the Hall of Fame speaker for 2022, how did that feel?
Oh, it was humbling. I was honored. I remember Aaron Swain had sent me an email and said, "Hey, can we talk?" And I was like, "Oh crap!"
We're going to take you off the docket.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and that's happened before. It's like, oh, we had to change plans. In fact, we were supposed to be out there the last 2 years for all-day events, and obviously neither of those happened because of the pandemic and COVID and things. So it's like, okay, now what? So I said, "Hey, I'm available right now." And we spoke, and it really was, it caught me off guard, but in a good way. We certainly have a lot of negative shocks these days. It was really an honor and a privilege. And this is especially coming from HR Southwest. I speak at a number of conferences, but I don't speak at every conference anymore or every event. One is it's just difficult to travel. You asked before, and I neglected to tell the story. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a coal town. At one time there were 20,000 people there. Now there's 6,000 people there. And certainly the industry's changed, and it was a great place to grow up, but certainly not the best of times for that area right away. But here I was coming from Pennsylvania, and it's difficult traveling these days, so I'm always a little cautious. But HR Southwest is always on my docket. If I'm accepted, which fortunately I have been. So it was just a humbling. I feel very honored, and I enjoy everybody down there, and hopefully that'll continue for years to come.
As I think about that, I think about, speaking. I do a little bit of speaking myself, and we don't speak to, be recognized, but it is always, it's always fascinating and exciting when we recognize people that speak to inspire and really make a difference. through the lives of others. I was sharing with someone the other day. I remember as a young leader how I was inspired by so many great storytellers. And now here I am in my late career. I like to say mid-career. My wife reminds me it's my late career. And how now I've become a storyteller. And it's only because of those speakers that were there when I would go to these conferences and hear those speakers. And it's just inspiring to just know how impactful a speaker can be. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. There's people that I've heard 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I still remember something they said. And maybe when I left that day, I didn't recognize it. But several years later, something sparks your interest or that name pops up again. And it's like how they changed my perspective, how they changed how the lens I looked at the world or how I thought about something differently. And it really is cumulative knowledge, that we have. But there's so many people, and hopefully I've had that opportunity, and hopefully I will have that opportunity to affect other people as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, let's talk about the HR Southwest Conference. Here it is, Fort Worth. You talked about one of the memories you had in the hotel. It's going to be October the 16th through the 19th. Of course, the conference theme: Learn, Network, and Grow. And then you're going to be speaking about, this really caught my attention, no BS in the workplace. Talk about that. What is no BS in the workplace all about?
Well, there's certainly a lot of BS in the workplace. For sure. Coming out of the pandemic, people are trying to figure out this remote hybrid thing. But BS, so there is BS, but there's also burnout and stress. Okay. And that's the BS that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. How do you create a culture that you can't eliminate stress? Mm-hmm. We would hope to eliminate burnout, which is really epidemic in the workplace these days. But the transition has been, in the past, for those who have listened to me and attended some sessions, and obviously it was well received, and I inspired some people in the past. We were talking about recruitment. We were talking about a candidate experience, what you need to do within a company and an organization to attract people, to create a better experience. But so my theme switched a little bit. Because right now we're not only having trouble finding people, or companies aren't having trouble finding people, but they're having trouble keeping the people. We have this great resignation, or the great reshuffle, or the great reevaluation, or the great reset, a million names for it. And the underlying challenge with that is that employees, 1 in 4 employees are experiencing burnout. I mean, we're not talking about just job stress. We're talking about burnout, and which is a form of depression. And actually, burnout is now recognized as a mental health issue by the World Economic Forum. They've recognized that as, although it's not classified in the ICD-9 or the ICD codes, it is now recognized as a worldwide epidemic. Workplace burnout, not from other reasons, but from the workplace, from toxic workplaces, that people are getting sick, and it's costing billions of dollars for companies. So that's what we're going to be talking about. What can companies do? What can employers do? What can employees do to have a no BS culture, where BS is lack of the BS, but burnout and stress?
I think that's so important. I've done some different talks around leadership fatigue. And when you're talking about that just now, I was thinking about how so many people have, it could be burnout, but I kind of referred to it as leadership fatigue, and how it's because of what we've been going through. We're like in survival mode, and we're lacking energy. And I was thinking about how, like whenever I plan a trip, I just got through putting together a trip with my daughter and my wife and her husband. And now all of a sudden I got some energy, because we're thinking about, we're looking forward. And whenever you're not looking forward, you're just looking at today. It creates a lot of leadership fatigue. Talk. I mean, I don't want you to share all of your tips, but I'd love for you to share maybe a tip that you might be sharing at the conference for someone that maybe someone's listening right now and they're like, hey, you know what? I need to hear this. Maybe share a tip that you might share during the conference.
No, thanks very much, Bruce, for that. And you're so right. I mean, fatigue is one of those systems, and or one of those symptoms, from burnout and stress and just general anxiety. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about, what I've been searching for a solution. I gave my TED Talk in 2016, and the topic of that was make change work for you. And it was really, I've been fascinated by a term called VUCA, VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And for anybody that's been following me, you probably heard me speak about that since the mid 2000s. It's an old term. I didn't create it. I didn't come up with that, but Warren Bennis, thought leader from the 80s and 90s, adopted that, and he said that's the world we're going to live in, and we need to learn how to lead in a VUCA world because it's going to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And here we are in 2020 hit, and I can't think of a better acronym that described our world then and since then. I talk about it as the never normal, and the never normal is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So with that, it's how do we were caught flat-footed. Organizations were flat-footed, people are flat-footed. How can we grow and thrive? How can we be less anxious and less burnt out and less stressed, and to be able to do that? So searching for a solution, I started to study and learned a little bit about Agile, the methodology behind that. But I was introduced to a model called and is based on an adaptability quotient. And the model was called ACE, and ACE stands for abilities, character, and environment. And up until a few years ago, there wasn't a whole lot written about adaptability. It was one of those nice to haves. Well, all of a sudden, with the pandemic, there was a lot of research that had gone into that, and then all of a sudden, the McKinseys, the Deloittes, the World Economic Forum, the Boston Consulting, all these global thought leaders started to talk about the need to be adaptable, and it was not only the need to be adaptable, but it wasn't a nice to have anymore. It was essential. And the fact is that the studies are now showing that it impacts our ability to enjoy life, our ability to enjoy our careers, our ability to be employed. The number one linkage between employability and what was the characteristic or the ability that allowed people to be employable in the future, and also earn more money, and also be more engaged, and also enjoy their careers, was adaptability. And adaptability was made up of things like, some of them you may be familiar with, like grit, resilience, growth mindset. Growth mindset's a favorite of mine. We actually just launched a coaching program around that. However, but it doesn't work in isolation. Most companies have said, oh, we need people that have more grit. We need people that are more resilient. We need people that have this growth mindset. And they spend all this money on hiring and training and developing and do all these things. The one thing they didn't change was their work culture. It was like, we need people to be more gritty and more resilient and have the growth mindset so they can put up with all our BS. And the number one factor that creates stress and burnout and distress and anxiety and worrisome and turnover and attrition is a toxic work culture. Because companies said, no. The leaders said, oh, it's not us. Oh, it's so hard to change culture. Because culture is complicated. I mean, it ranges from everything from how you hire, to your leadership style, to your compensation and your equity and your diversity and inclusion and sustainability, and it involves so much. Let's just place the blame and the burden on employees. They need to be more gritty to put up with our crap, our BS. And the studies are showing that a toxic work culture is actually has 10 times more impact on turnover and negativity and burnout and stress than compensation does. And on mentoring, I mean, all the things that people throw out there, the number one factor is a toxic work culture that companies still tolerate. People still, tolerate their top performer who harasses and really, or the manager who just doesn't treat people well and doesn't give people feedback, or criticizes people, from aggressions to microaggressions that happen. And it's like, yeah, but they're the biggest revenue source. They just don't deal with it, but the bottom line costs are enormous. Gallup just came out with their State of the Workplace report, and Gallup's done this for years and years and years. And what they found out is 1/5 of the workforce is miserable. 1/5 is miserable.
Wow.
Again, we can talk about burnout and stress, but when you say that 1 out of 5 people show up every day miserable, and the number is higher for managers and executives, and then you look at certain industries, like healthcare, and it's significantly higher, for that. And the primary cause is the culture. So, talking about having a no BS culture isn't just a nicety anymore. It really is about how are you going to recruit people, but how are you going to keep the people you have? Because every time somebody walks out the door, it's taking longer and longer to find a replacement. And you're not only losing a warm body, you're losing experience. You're disrupting the team dynamics. You're disrupting the customer dynamics. It's ugly. So finally, we've got people's attention. Finally, after all these years of talking about labor shortages coming, when we have this record number of people walking out the door and leaving and creating a revolving door in company, finally we were able to wake up. But people were throwing money and perks and ping pong tables and, oh, you can work at home 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And that's not going to take care of it. If you have a bad culture, a toxic culture, and there's BS in your culture, then it's not going to go away.
There's so much here, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I know there's a lot of listeners that are thinking, I'm planning on going to the conference, or I might be going to the conference, but now I want to hear more about what Ira has to say. I love what you said also about adaptability, because I think that is certainly key. And when you talk about workplace culture, that's not a 1 day thing, is it? I mean, that's a work in progress, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, and that's daunting. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about cultural transformation, it's like, oh, this year we're going to work on that. So we have a committee. We're going to bring in a speaker. We're going to do some organizational change. We're going to tweak it a little bit. But it's really at a tipping point, because companies can't afford to just tweak it. I mean, and it's not even good cultures need tweaking. It's evolving. It's a living organism, a culture. It's made up of all the behaviors of all the people. And, here's a tip that I can talk to people about. And again, this is the theme when people say, oh, you moved from recruiting to, talking about wellness. Well, the one common thread is about the experience that people have. We talk about culture. We talk about engagement. All that is a measure of how people experience working for you or doing business with you. And it really isn't, I think people get it wrong. I think it's inside out. I think people try to create a culture strategically. They do all the right things. They create the blueprint. It's like going to the grocery store. I bought all the ingredients. But you know as well as I do, is that even with the right ingredients and the best recipe, it doesn't always turn out like a master chef. And the part that's missing is, rather than focusing on employees' experience, how they feel, and then that by changing the way that they're experiencing work, creates your culture. We're trying to create this culture that in turn affects the employee experience, and it does. But it's a chicken or the egg. Shouldn't we be focusing on the experience, how someone applies for work? How do they feel when they show up? How do they feel when they're sick? How do they feel when their child needs something? How do they feel about your compensation? Are they treated fairly? How are they experiencing your organization and your business? And if you create that, even if you don't do it well, people will feel better. That's your culture. Don't you want people to say they care about me? Because the number one complaint is that you hear, always the highest percentage, negative percentage, is employers don't care about their people. They talk about it. People are our most important asset. But then when you say, well, how well are we doing? How are you experiencing that? It always turns out like 70 to 80% said, I don't think my employers are doing enough, or I don't think they care about me. I don't think my manager cares about me. So I've sort of flipped it inside out and said, culture is too abstract. Talk about the experience. What's their experience with HR? What's their experience with their manager? What's their experience with technology? There was a study that just came out by Avanti, and they just it's a really, really nice report. It was about the digital employee experience. 1 out of 4 employees are thinking of leaving their employer, quitting their job because of a bad digital experience.
It's mind blowing when you think about numbers like that. And I appreciate that. I will tell you that the employee experience is a hot topic. But what I appreciate what you just shared was you mentioned you're not just talking about these companies that are struggling. You're also talking about companies that are having success, that they need to continue. And it reminded me of a quote I heard, and I can't remember exactly who shared this, but I thought about it when I went to the gym one day, and I try to stay in shape, and a lady there, she said, "Why are you coming? You're in shape." And I heard this quote that said, "It's easier to stay in shape than it is to get in shape." Right. And so as I think about that, even companies that are having success, they need to continue to work on things they can do and really points to the employee experience. At the end of the day. Hey, I want to ask you, Ira, when attendees attend your session and then they're leaving, the session's over, everybody's inspired, ready to go. What are you hoping that they come up to you and tell you?
That's a great question. Like every other event that I had, I want people to walk away and say, I'm going to try that. You gave me something we can do. Or they even ask, can we talk? But ultimately, I want to give people at least 1 or 2 tips, or 1 or 2 tools, beyond tips, but tools that they can go back with. And the tool may just be a question that they should ask. What should they be asking? What's going to make a difference? How can they initiate that change? I teach a course in a leadership program, graduate program in organizational change. And ultimately, it's how do you get people to ask better questions? How do you give them that insight of how to get more people involved? How to get more people to say, now I get it. So hopefully I'll be able to give everybody at least 1 or 2 tools that they can walk with. And again, those tools just may be as simple as, that's a great question to ask.
I love that, because you're not, it sounds to me like when they come in, you're not going to say, okay, here's how you do it. Step 1, step 2, step 3. you're basically going to share stories and equip them with the right questions to ask and to work through the process, right?
I could do that, but that's the same old BS. The other BS, not the burnout stress part, the other BS part. Yeah, it really is. Every culture is going to be different. And that's part of the problem. It's like, here's the 10 steps to create a great culture.
Yeah.
That's BS.
Yeah.
Because every culture is different. And there may be people that work in technology or healthcare. Or manufacturing. There may be people that work with, have 10,000 employees and another company has 4 employees. Every company is going to be different, where they work, how they work, the regions they work, what they produce. So there is no boilerplate, but there's going to be questions you can ask and things you can do that will be helpful.
Hey, let me ask you a question here as I think about, you sharing this, and we're talking about burnout. And another big topic right now is mental health. And I'm just curious if a manager is working through the process of, helping employees that might have burnout, could that also be part of mental health, or are those separate issues?
We got to be careful, and it's absolutely part of mental health. As I said earlier, now the World Economic Forum actually recognizes burnout as, and so does the medical community as as one of the symptoms that is leading to depression and lots of health problems, heart problems, diabetes. However, we need to be careful. We're HR professionals.
Right.
I've got a medical degree in my background, but but it's beyond the scope of what I was licensed to practice. We need to be sensitive that burnout and stress and depression is part of mental illness, but we can't treat the mental illness. What we can do is we can remove some of the causes of that. We can make it we're all prone to be stressed. We're all prone to burnout, and some of us more than others are hardwired differently. But what we need to do is not pile on. If we can create a better, when we talk about an environment, a little bit of a heads up of where I'll be heading, we talk about company support, team support, having a psychologically safe space. How do you create all those things? If you don't have those, then the stresses of every day, we're just piling on. It's just one more thing. It's just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's that trickle down, and eventually you're drowning. The bucket gets filled. So we need to be careful that we're not diagnosing and treating mental illness. We're not going to solve mental illness from the workplace, but what we can do is not exacerbate it. We can't pile on. We need to take people that have normal lives that aren't clinically dysfunctional or have a clinical disease such as depression. Depression's a clinical disease. What we need to do is treat people like human beings and treat them, have different behaviors. And so it's a fine line between the burnout and stress and depression and all these symptoms and mental illness. HR is not licensed to treat it. Most counselors are not licensed to treat it. But what we can do is just create a better environment that doesn't lead to mental illness. Or for people that are more prone to it, that don't have all the skills, what can we do to help arm them with grit and resilience and growth mindset? Because by doing that, they're better prepared not only in business, but they're better prepared to deal with their families and their friends and all the stresses that are going to happen.
This has been terrific. I really am so grateful for you coming on the show today and sharing this. I cannot wait to see you at the conference and to be part of your session. I want to ask you a couple more questions as we kind of roll to It's Time to Accelerate. I always like to ask this question for guests that I have on the show. And that is, have you ever been given any advice during your career? It was just so good. You just find yourself always sharing that advice.
It's changed a little bit. I wrote about this. I actually was in a preface. My mother always, and I've heard this before, is, knowledge is power. but I'm going to modify that a little bit because I did take that and I've got multiple degrees and I'm a continuous learner. It's really learning is power. It's not, knowledge. And I guess it says that, but a lot of people have taken to, spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources. They got a lot of certifications. They're constantly racking up degrees, diplomas, certificates. But it's the learning that's important. It's the learning. And maybe that's why I'm still that millennial, not that all millennials are learners, but that as a baby boomer, maybe I'm more Gen Z. It's not that I'm a geek. People think, I love technology, but it's the learning aspect of it. So somewhere, and multiple people had shared that, but I know one of them came from my mother, is that, knowledge is power, education is power. But education isn't always having a degree. I know some really, really educated people that really had a GED. Some of them may not even had a high school diploma. But boy, they were curious and they just loved that learning aspect. So
yeah, I did a survey years ago with CEOs, and during that process, I asked if there's any advice you would share for others that would help them have success. And the number one thing was continuous learning. Continuous learning by far was the top answer on that. And I'm with you on that. Hey, I want to, let's shift over to the last part of the show. It's called It's Time to Accelerate. I like to ask just a few fun questions as we kind of wrap up. The first question I like to ask, you've been a speaker, you've been doing this for a long time. You've traveled quite a bit. You have a favorite city?
Oh, of course, Fort Worth.
Good answer for the HR Southwest Conference. I love that. And I love Fort Worth too. The Sundance Square is amazing, isn't it?
It is. We love walking around. We love going to the restaurants. We love being there. We love the congeniality. And as I said, it's a little bit of a home. So,
hey, what are you looking most forward to? You're gonna be recognized as a Hall of Fame speaker. You're gonna be speaking. What do you like? What's energizing you about coming this year for the conference?
Oh, in some degree. I've got a couple homes, not physical homes, and we just have our one residence. But I enjoy, it's coming back and sharing a few days with people. Again, it feels like family. We all long for community. And although I'm a big digital guy and I'm good, the world's caught up to me with video conferencing and Zoom and everything else the last few years. It's still nice having a community to come home to. I've had a lot of class reunions and we just had a really, really big one 2 years ago. But it was nice to go back and be with people that, you appreciate. And so that's what I'll look forward to.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, outside of being an author, running your company, podcasting, all of the things you do in the workplace, speaking, what energizes you outside all of that?
My grandkids.
Oh, grandkids. How many do you have?
I have 5. Two of them I don't see very often. 3 live real close by. We've got a 22-year-old who you talked about things that people shared. She would share the one thing, and somewhere somebody told me this before too. I don't remember who it was, but it was, I will help you. I will do everything to help you succeed, but I will do nothing to help you fail. And as she was going through her growing up stage, her adolescence, she tells me now that was the thing that flipped the switch. That's what changed her around. And she's doing very well on Dean's List in college, and she's got all these ambitions and growing up. And then we have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And it's just amazing watching them. It's just fun watching them explore and learn. And so
hey, I'm energized just from you telling me that story. That is fantastic. I'll do everything to help you succeed, and I won't do anything to help you fail. That's
Why?
fantastic.
Why would you
I
do
love that. That's so great. Oh my goodness. Okay. Last question I have, Ira, this is my favorite question I like to ask on the show. And I'm interested in your perspective here. So Ira, 10 years older, is knocking at your door and you're going to go answer that door. What's he going to tell you?
And I'll really be an old baby boomer. And the millennial in body will probably be eligible for retirement. It's a scary thought. Hopefully it's just keep learning. It's like, aren't you glad you did what you did? Aren't you glad you didn't retire? So hopefully that's my 10-year-older self will be looking back and telling me, be pleased with the decisions I made at this point in my life.
This has been really special for me, Ira, to have you on the show and just to hear your perspective. I cannot wait. So those for you listening, save the date. The HR Southwest Conference is going to be in Fort Worth, Texas, October the 16th through the 19th. And be sure and check out Ira Wolfe's session, No BS in the Workplace. He's also got a podcast. He's got a book out, and check out his TED Talk. I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes for you to be able to check that out. And I am confident you are going to get a lot out of this session, and you're going to grow just from being around Ira. Hey, Ira, for those who are listening and they want to maybe connect with you before the conference, what's the best way for them to connect?
LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot. So I put a lot of information, connect and engage a lot on LinkedIn. So please connect with me. Just tell me where you heard about it, and I'll be sure to connect. And then you can also go up to my website, irawolfe.com. And Wolfe is with an E.
Ira Wolfe, WOLFE. And I like what you said there. When you connect with a guest on the podcast, be sure and just put in the notes. Hey, I heard you on Life in the Leadership Lane. It just deepens that connection from the start. You're like, oh, okay, there's an instant connection here. And I love that. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your perspective. And again, I can't wait to see you in Fort Worth. And I appreciate you being on the show, Ira.
Thank you. It's obviously this is fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and can't wait to get back.
And congratulations, Hall of Fame speaker. I'm excited. So I can't wait to share this episode. I'll talk to you later, Ira.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce.